Hi, everybody. I must apologize again for not being available on Friday when I was away. I was sick. Um, I just felt that, along with giving you the handout for these very important topics that we are discussing, that I would also like to share a video with you going through them. These topics we'll also be discussing next class, and we'll be going over them in very technical detail, looking at the marking rubric, so the specific requirements that you have for the upcoming main assignment, your assignment 1, which is work time percent of your grade. And this should also help with your learning activity 2, although I am very happy to see that very many of you have already submitted it. And just remember that learning activities don't have a late mark. If you're not pleased with the mark you get and you feel that you can answer those questions better, please do them. You can resubmit it on Moodle, and I will get to it when I am marking the next set of learning activities. So let's just get right into it. So our topic that would have been for Friday, and is for now whenever you are watching, are two very important concepts to this course: genre and literary analysis. And we're going to start with genre. So, genre, the best way to think of it is to understand how closely related it is to the words genus and gene. They all share the same root word, a borrowed Greek word for English that discusses things being of the same like or kind. And in literature, we will talk about genre in terms of different pieces that belong to the same genre as having conventions or similar features that make them part of the same sort of family. So just like the word genus or gene suggests that different aspects or individuals, they belong to the same grouping because they share similar features. In the same way, when we talk about literature, as well as other forms of media, such as music, movies, television, the shared conventions that they have, the shared features, the way they do things that, you know, help us recognize that there is some sort of resemblance between these two pieces of art. That is how we know that we are talking about items within the same genre. Now, in this course, we'll mostly only be discussing nonfiction genres. Genre in general with literature is pulled out into two main branches, two main families, kind of almost the flora and fauna of genre, which is fiction and nonfiction. And in this course, we are mostly concerned with nonfiction as a genre, although we may have the opportunity to read some short pieces of fiction during class. Now, with nonfiction as a genre, in its just overall generality, the focus of nonfiction genres is the main argument, which we will more and more be discussing as the thesis or the central point that that piece of writing is making. And it will always be supported by what we will more and more be discussing as premises. The premises, you could think of the legs of the stool of the thesis, how it stands upon itself, how it makes itself a viable thing that we could count upon to understand a certain argument and even perhaps to be persuaded by it. The premises are more fully developed by an analysis of the evidence that is given to show how those premises are correct. So there's the main argument, the central idea that is being offered in a piece. There is the premises that support that main argument, that show how its different aspects all make sense. And then there is an analysis of evidence and examples that are given to really give legs to that stool, or perhaps table, if that metaphor works for you better. Another aspect of analyzing nonfiction, which is a really important part of what you are doing with assignment 1, you are, of course, first of all, giving a summary, which is not a synopsis of the entire piece. And by synopsis, I mean you are not giving just a shortened version of what happened in the piece of writing that you have chosen to discuss, but you are giving a summary of what was most important, of the argument, of its main details, supporting premises, and perhaps some of the pieces of analysis and evidence that gave great strength to that. That is part of your job in your summary of a nonfiction piece. But to get back to what I was saying, with analysis, you are doing something different. You are discussing how that message was given across. So you are thinking about different things, not necessarily just strictly what the message is, which you can put into your own words, and in which case you will be providing a paraphrase that must be properly cited, but you will also be analyzing how that message was given across, how that main argument or central idea and the supporting details and analysis and evidence of that argument, how those were presented in terms of the actual how, not the what. So the what, again, is the message, that is the summary, that's the main argument of the piece that you're working with. The analysis is the how it was said. So for here, you're thinking about things such as the structure of the article, the organization of the words and paragraphs, the words themselves that were chosen, and what they have to say about the style and tone and perspective of the writer, and perhaps even their bias and their point of view on the subject matter. You're analyzing those things. You're digging into the words of the text to see what you can find about the very technique of the message that was delivered. That is the essence of literary analysis. Now, when you're engaging both in literary analysis as well as summary, to some degree, and as well as working with genre, oh, sorry, my slide went ahead. There are two things that you need to be very conscious of right from the very beginning, hopefully right from the very first reading of your piece, which it is often advisable to read more than once, so that you can construct your own presentation of what the main message was, which is your thesis of what the author's main message or thesis was, as well as constructing your own presentation of how that message was delivered, which in a way you must think of as your thesis of the how of the author's message delivery. So your thesis on the literary and analytical part of reading a piece of literature. The two places to start is to think about who the audience of the author was, perhaps who their hopeful audience was, their intended audience, or perhaps who their actual audience ended up being, as well as their purpose in writing the piece. Now, with the question of audience, that will give you a lot to analyze in terms of how the message was delivered. Did the writer use a lot of slang? Did they use a lot of informal speech? Or did they, as we know happens with scholarly pieces of writing, did they use a lot of technical terms? Were they even perhaps very jargony in their attempt to become to speak to their own community, which we know from the library is often one of the main intents of scholarly pieces of writing. They are writing to other experts in their field. They are being verified by other experts in their field, and their intent is to speak to that audience of other experts, and to make gains, to make progress within the understanding of what can sometimes be a very narrow sort of discipline within academia. That is something to consider. That gives you something to analyze, as well as a way to really approach the piece of writing and understand its overall purpose, and therefore its overall main message, which goes back to summary, which is all about the main argument or thesis of a piece. Now, as mentioned in this course, we will almost exclusively be dealing with nonfiction. I am hoping that we'll get to read some short fiction pieces, which will help us with different aspects of writing. But for assignment 1, and also for the large part of learning activity 2, as most of you have seen, I'm very pleased to see that most of you have finished learning activity 2. There are 4 different types of nonfiction writing, and by types I don't mean genres. There's a plethora of genres for nonfiction as well as for fiction. But for types of writing, so the actual technique and the way the writing is done, there's 4 main types for nonfiction. There's the expository, where you are trying to explain or inform your readers about something. This type of writing will offer a lot of facts. Perhaps it will give statistics. It may include a lot of research, that gives evidence for the analysis that it's making. That is all expository writing. Then there's also descriptive writing. With descriptive writing, as we can see on the slide, very figurative language will be used, so rich descriptions that have the intent of making a sensual effect on the reader. So drawing them in, helping them to feel or hear or smell or taste, perhaps as some of us maybe felt with Amy Choi's article, What Americans Can Learn from Other Food Cultures, just to bring the audience into that very physical place where they can feel what you are trying to bring towards them. Closely related is narrative. Narrative, of course, means stories, and that is where you are telling a tale. I know how simple this may sound, but it's so important and such a very good strategy for bringing ideas across. But you will tell a story, you will bring audiences in through their imagination so that they can journey with you through ideas that have perhaps a beginning, middle, and end that evolves and unfolds and brings that idea across. That is narrative writing. And then there is persuasive writing. Persuasive writing tends to be what one of the main goals of nonfiction writing is in general, which is to change the perspective or judgment of the readers, which is to make them think, differently, or to just, shift, or perhaps even just to allow for another way of thinking to enter their consciousness. And you do this through carefully chosen words that allow you to present solid arguments that are valid and true, words that we will be looking into very much so when we're talking about writing our own critical analysis papers, but valid as well as true pieces of argumentation that allow the reader to think a little differently about things that perhaps they were very sure of, things that were very automatic as the idea that food should be something that should be hurriedly consumed so that we can get on with our work, to borrow again from Amy Choi as an example. So last note, which I know is in your PDF handout, is that all very effective nonfiction writing will tend to use all these different four types of writing in any genre. All four different types of writing will tend to be used for the most effective means of persuading and bringing ideas across to readers. Now, in your marking guide, which we will look at together closely next class, you will notice that in the analysis portion of your writing handbook, there is a big chunk of your mark that is devoted strictly towards your analysis of rhetorical strategy. So let's talk about that. With rhetorical strategy, we approach this with an ancient tradition borrowed from the ancient Greeks, who cut it down into three different aspects. And those three different aspects are ethos, pathos, and logos. What each of these are different ways or different methods or strategies of bringing your reader to see your point of view, or perhaps to persuade them to your argument, or to help them understand whatever it was your intention for them to understand. Now, for the first one, ethos, if you were to just Google rhetorical strategy of ethos, you would see most likely, a common sort of a basic definition that it's an appeal to authority. But because of the way the word authority has changed so much in the past 100 or 2 years, and even longer, having a long history in the English language and its root languages, a better way to think of it is an appeal to value. When you are using the rhetorical strategy of ethos, you are trying to affect how a reader feels about their values, their ethics, the principles and norms that they exist in within their culture. So, for example, with Amy Choi again, her rhetorical strategy of the use of ethos, she is getting us to think of different ways that we can understand how food should be consumed. She doesn't want us to just think of it as, something that we just quickly consume as individuals before we get back to our work, but to understand that cultures throughout the world have always used food as a way of communion, a way to say social status, perhaps, all different kinds of ways. She does her best to show that there is a whole ethos. There's a whole set of values and ethics and principles and norms and cultural ideals and understandings that go towards how we understand food. And this is all about value. It's ethos. Next, we have pathos. Pathos, similar to ethos, will sound very much like its more current English word, passion. When you use the rhetorical strategy of pathos, you are appealing to the passions of the reader. You do this using both descriptive writing and also perhaps narrative, such as with Eden Robinson's Sasquatch at Home. She uses the narratives of her family, as well as the rich descriptions of the world they live in, to help us feel what it is like to be in those cultures and to think about what it means and how it would be to be part of that. She draws us in a way that is very embodied and very rich and sensual. And of course, it has its ultimate strategy of nonfiction persuasion and getting ideas across. But again, that is the rhetorical strategy of of the use of the appeal to passions, of pathos. Lastly, we have logos. This also will sound like it's a more modern English word, logic. Here we have an appeal to reason. And we see this in any sort of writing that uses a lot of evidence, that asks us to consider and to perhaps journey along with the writer on an analysis of facts, of ideas, of argumentation that is drawn together in a way that is valid as well as true. That is the appeal to logos. It's a rhetorical strategy that you can see right away in almost all scholarly work because it will be full of citations, which showed a lot of research was done. You can always see it, of course, often in textbooks that will show how, one idea leads to the next in a very unhurried, smooth way where, things flow together logically in a valid and true manner. That is the rhetorical strategy of logos. Now, there is this video available for you to view. I believe you should be able to access it through this presentation, but if not, you will be able to through the PDF. It's an important technical aspect of the work you're doing for assignment 1. Now, for assignment 1, you are just analyzing one piece of writing. And I must apologize for the background noise. I live downtown and have no way of canceling that out if you can't hear it. So I'll just pause for 1 second. So the essence of this principle, which is a technical part of what you are doing with assignment 1, as well as with your critical analysis paper later, whenever in that paper you are discussing your sources or any pieces of literature that you're using to analyze and discuss your own ideas, what this mainly means is in terms of writing in the literary present, is that literature, and that includes all pieces of scholarship, which you'll be using for your essay, and the one piece of writing that you'll be using for assignment 1, is that whenever you're speaking about another piece of writing, a piece of literature, you speak about it as though it was written, as though it was alive and present. You speak about it, for the most part, when you delve into it, in the present tense. Now this video will get into the nuance of it, so please do watch it. But what that means in shorthand is if you are discussing a piece of writing, so say you're discussing something Amy Choi said in her article, whatever it is that you're discussing there, you will speak about it in the present tense, as though what she said is something she just said, and you're speaking about it just now in that way. Well, like I said, in that video, it will get into the nuance of it, because if from that point where, you begin to discuss a piece of the article that you have chosen from your 3 options, you're discussing it there in the present tense. If you were then to continue in your analysis to discuss something that was said previously, you would speak about that part in the past tense. And then vice versa, if you were to discuss something that happens later from the point that you began your analysis of, it would be written from there in the future tense. Another important aspect of the work you have for assignment 1 is to be in the right point of view. And this is an important concept in literature that I'm sure is not unfamiliar. So we have 3 different points of view in English. There is the first person, which we must keep in mind can be both singular and plural. If it's a singular person, if it's a singular first person point of view, then it would have pronouns such as I, me, or my. But if it was that first point of view, but not just of one person, but of several, so a plural first person point of view, it would have the pronouns we, us, our. And then there's the second point of view where the listener or the reader is in focus. The pronouns there would be you or your. And you may have noticed or perhaps even commented upon in your work for Learning Activity 2 about genre that certain types of writing have to be written in the second person point of view or tend to be, such as, say, self-help books, where the focus really is on the reader. So the writer will be saying, you should do this. This might be helpful to you. You are capable of this. Or even a manual where the writer's intent and purpose for their audience is really focused on the listener or reader. And then they will be saying things such as, wake up in the morning and then you do this, have this to eat, and then you do this, and then you do this. It'll be a lot of you and your, because the focus for second person is on the listener or reader. With assignment 1, we are using the third person because the focus is on the subject that is being discussed. It is on the text itself. It's on the message of the text, its main point, its central idea, its thesis and premises, etc., and how those are being brought across. It is not on, you as the first person and how you would think about what is being said. So you would not say, I think Eden Robinson's culture is very interesting. You would not even use the first person in the plural and say we can learn a lot from Indigenous writers and their cultures, because the focus is not on that first person, which is you or any group you belong to. It's on the text itself, because this is a textual summary and analysis. So you will be using pronouns like he, she, it, they, very vague. And I'm sure some of you have seen directly in comments, and I know I have mentioned to you in class, pronouns are best avoided, but even, they're best avoided because they can make things unclear, but we do need them. There's a reason they exist in language. So just be aware of which focus you're in, which point of view, whether you're using pronouns or proper names or descriptions. So this brings me to another thing that we will most certainly be discussing in our next class. And I would like to mention that we will be discussing it using the language of African literature as our example text. I'm looking forward to this, and it will be the beginning of us being able to really delve into text. And that is paragraph structure. Now, in nonfiction writing, in general, and in academic writing, most absolutely, there is a structure to paragraphs that must be followed. And all of Unit 3, hopefully a lot of you have noticed, is devoted towards discussing this whole idea of paragraph structure. So paragraph structure, one way to think of it is that it is the microcosm of all bigger pieces of nonfiction writing. So what it has in common as a micro of the macro is that it has a beginning, middle, and end. And as simple as that may sound, all of those pieces must be there. It can be so easy, for example, to forget to have that proper introduction, especially for a paragraph that is perhaps within a larger piece, because you feel you're already discussing the main idea that is being unfolded in your document text. And it can also be very easy to forget to have that conclusion aspect, that end aspect. But you need to make sure that you have all of those. And I really encourage you when you're proofreading your work to look at each of your paragraphs and see, does it have a beginning aspect? Is there a middle aspect? And is there a conclusion? So now let's just discuss a little more of what those three pieces are. Now, in a paragraph, you will have what is called either a topic or transition sentence. If it's the first paragraph or the only paragraph of a major subject heading or of a piece of writing on its own, then it will just be a topic sentence or the topic part of a sentence for the paragraph. But if you're transitioning from a previous paragraph to the next, then that topic sentence will be transitional. It will still discuss the topic of the paragraph, but in a way that helps show how it transitions from the ideas that have come before it in the larger piece. It's also important to note that while you can construct your paragraphs having each of these 5 parts, or 3 parts, as some literary theories think of them, while they must all be there, they don't necessarily need to be their own sentences. In fact, it often happens, for example, that the topic or transition that is given for a paragraph is part of the same sentence that also gives the assertion. So what the assertion is of a paragraph is like the mini thesis. It tells the main point of the paragraph. If you are writing, say, a persuasive or argumentative piece, it will give that specific argument, and it will just in general tell what the paragraph is about to expound upon, which is the next section of the paragraph, which can be thought of as the examples, the evidence, the explanation, the expounding upon of the main idea, its central point, perhaps argument, that is being written about in that paragraph. Once you have done that, once you have fully explained the topic, perhaps transitioned into a new topic or transitioned into a furthermore of a previous topic and given the main idea of it, so had that topic, had that assertion, and then expounded upon it with evidence, which perhaps was citations from the different texts you were using, or for assignment 1, the one text. Used examples or anecdotes for the idea you presented. It just expounded upon that idea. Once you have done all of that, you still need to pull it all together and give it, sum up its significance. It is so easy sometimes, I think, to forget the conclusion just because it can feel like you've said all you need to say, but you need to make sure that all your paragraphs give your reader a bit of a send-off that tells them what is so significant about the topic that you have been discussing in that paragraph and your main idea about it that you backed up with evidence and examples that you expounded upon. So lastly, in this presentation, voice, style, tone, and diction. Most of these are part of what you will see in the marking rubric for assignment 1 under analysis, because this again goes back to the how of what was said. So again, not the main message, not the thesis or the central idea of what was said, which is your focus in the summary, but how was it said? What sort of words did the writer use? Were they speaking to a very select audience, as for example, it's not only them who do this, but as scholars tend to do with their peer-reviewed work, or did they use a style that would only appeal to people with a certain attitude, which showed perhaps the attitude and perspective they had about the idea? What is the tone or the intended sort of feeling that that the writer is trying to give their audience. What sort of descriptive words are so noticeable within that writing. And of course, diction, which really all of these come under the very, very wide umbrella of diction, which is about word choice, which is about the words we use to give our message across. These are things to focus upon with literary analysis, because that is exactly what we're doing when we analyze literature. We're looking at the words that were used, we're looking at the structure that those words and those paragraphs and those sentences were put together. Was there a lot of short, simple sentences, that have that staccato emphasis on one main idea? Was there a lot of complex, compound sentences that help group together great big ideas, all in the purpose of one main thought, that brought the perspective of that writer across? We look at these things, we think about them, and we analyze them. And this is what we are writing about, what we are doing when we work on assignment 1. So again, we will talk about this and more in next class, using the language of African literature as an example of a way to do this sort of summary and analysis. So I encourage you to read that dense article, which I do acknowledge is one of the more dense piece of scholarships that we have on our reading list, but I also know there is so much we can get from it, and I look forward to seeing you all next class. Have a great week. Bye.